Will 2024 be another record setting year for SaaS? Let's dig into it in this episode of Closing Time. Welcome to Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. My name is Chip House. I'm the CMO at Insightly CRM, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Eric Christopher. He's the CEO of Zylo, a SaaS management firm. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Hi, Chip. Thanks for having me. I am delighted to be here.
Yeah. Eric, so we used to work together a long time ago in SaaS, and I was excited to have you on. I've admired Zylo from afar for quite a long time, and super interested in the data that you have. I know that you created a research report called the 2024 SaaS Management Index, and I'd like to dig into that today. Is that cool?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
So, being in the software space, some have called it the Great App Layoff. Yeah, I think you've called it the Great Rationalization, but you're seeing more and more firms in the last couple of years trying to justify their spend and reduce the number of applications they have in the organization. And this data is crazy to me. Today, the average organization has 269 apps, down from 291 apps in 2022, a 7% year over year decrease. And that's plummeted from 2021 when organizations averaged 323 apps, or a 10% decrease. And so in my head, I was thinking like 15, 20 apps for orgs, but this data is incredible. Why is that?
Yeah, well, let's kind of step back. When you mentioned the SaaS Management Index report, it's something we've been building for 7 years, and we're analyzing every single dollar that goes into software spend. And a lot of times there's a lot of assumption that a company's powering their business on just maybe a dozen apps or something like that. But when you really get into understanding how many tools are being used, it's really tracking every spend, because you have employee purchasing, you have every department, like you're in the marketing and sales category. And so there's just so many different buyers and users of SaaS. And so this data has been generated. What we're looking from a trend perspective, to answer your question, this is from $40 billion of cloud and software spend.
Wow.
And I think what's interesting too is it tracks periods of time. Like, we go back when you and I started in the early 2000s, which is hard to say, but SaaS had been growing steadily for 20% year over year. This is a Gartner statistic. Hit the pandemic, it explodes. Every CFO is even encouraging by application to empower remote work. So holding back software was the least of the concern at the time. Post-pandemic, capital crunch a bit with venture capital and inflation rates and things like that, with interest rates. Now, companies, especially tech companies, have to really reduce costs. So that's what's happened with this kind of plummeting of SaaS. Is we had a bit of a peak of 20%, and then pop, a lot more application purchasing. And now we're contracting back to, I think, if you put a curve of 20% year over year, we're kind of coming back to that steady curve. We just had a artificial increase because of the pandemic and remote work.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, you and I are both from the software space, and so we know that utilization of the software you buy is critical.
Mhm.
And clearly, organizations aren't using all of the licenses that they buy, which I think probably drives a lot of the work that you get, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I think the getting visibility into utilization of software is difficult, even though you've got access to user portals that show activity and things like that. Vendors typically haven't focused on displaying what's not being used, right? They show what's being used, and so what we're really doing is helping have a third party analysis of monitoring what's being used and what's not. And that could be, sometimes it's when an application is, you have employees no longer there and they're going completely unused. But also you have different levels of features. I think like a really good example most people might understand if you're using SaaS platforms, or use Zoom, for example. Zoom, you can have free licenses if you're an employee that does not host meetings. And then if you are an employee that hosts meetings, then you need a paid license. Many times companies are oversubscribed in licenses that are to produce content, but they might only be view only. So companies can do this on their own, but that's something we make really easy as a from a business standpoint with our software platform, is to see those types of trends.
So I think in our pre-call, Eric, you mentioned that the average organization feels like it's wasting about $2 million on software, and some of the larger enterprises are wasting over $100 million. Are those numbers right? That's crazy.
Yeah, they're right. Now we work with a spectrum of companies. We have companies that are 500 to 1,000 employees that are, especially in the tech space, are wasting nearly $1 million a year in underused licensing or redundancies. And then we also work with some of the world's biggest companies that have 25 to 50,000 employees, and that's where those numbers really start to just compound and multiply. When you think about a company that's using 1,000 apps, maybe the average app is 50 or 100K a year, and you can start to see how the numbers really do add up.
Yeah, it makes sense. So we hear from our customers that one of the benefits they get from our CRM platform is that it was built together with marketing automation and our customer service application, and so when a customer adds on marketing automation or customer service or our middleware product App Connect, they cite one of the main reasons was, hey, it's the same view of the customer, which helps across my organization, and it's just easier to consolidate rather than trying to combine all my different software. Do you think the message is, if you consolidate, or if you can consolidate, Eric, you should?
I think the short answer is yes. The reasons you just mentioned, like the idea that you can have one single view of the customer, you could have departments collaborating and working together more efficiently. All those reasons have always been true. And I think what's happened with the cost pressures and the sheer overwhelming nature for many of the organization of how each department might be using different applications, there is a real cost issue now with that. And so you have cost issues, you have risk issues as well, because you have data moving into different places. And so I think when you have more apps and less consolidation, your risk profile does go up, because when employees leave, where does the data go? Do they still have access? Just in general, having a point of view of kind of what are your platform technologies. So CRM is one of those, right? You have CRM for customer relationships and sales. So very, very smart to think about how when you add point solutions, how do they kind of enrich that all-in-one experience. And then also there's systems like HRIS systems, so you want to have, a platform for HR, you want to have a platform for financials, and then you start to kind of build out your point solutions from there. And that's where you really need to weigh, do I need something that's really best of breed to add on, or can the platform that I have today do what we need? And those benefits of being in the same platform from a cost collaboration perspective outweigh, that next great feature of a point solution.
So you had mentioned that, I mean, clearly more like larger companies are likely to have procurement. And you had mentioned that procurement is maybe having a moment.
Mhm.
So talk us through how roles of IT, procurement, and actual hands-on teams are evolving when it comes to SaaS purchases.
Sure. Going back to the point I made earlier about, like, go back to pre 2020 when SaaS is just increasing. There was a sort of this moment of where there was a shift in kind of the 2010s where IT was no longer the gatekeeper of software. It was business can make the decision. You don't need to implement software. That was the era that we were in. Pandemic hits, and then kind of that 2 year kind of period of time where we have to empower our workforce at home for an unknown period of time. CFOs sort of gave a blank check to everyone to buy software, and it was kind of survival mode. It was just get every application that you can. And then now we're kind of back to this moment in time, which I think is the procurement moment in time, which is, we're no longer an optional business partner of yours. We're here now to be professional negotiators, be experts on software. CFOs are now either in the driver's seat to make a final call, or be in the co-pilot seat to be a very, very influential, in the decision. And so I think this is kind of it feels maybe like an overcorrection, especially if you're in the sales seat selling software. Now that you've got to get playbooks on how to sell a CFO and convince them, and on the business case and things like that. But I think it's a healthy reset of where we were. I think software buying really was accelerated probably too much for the businesses to absorb. And now it's the procurement's time to help kind of bring us back to getting back to the basics. You build a good, a business case to why you need the application to the business, and then you go through a formal process and look at a few different vendors and go through it. And I think we're back we're back into that. So it's kind of maybe we're just back to the way that things should be to balance, bringing in innovative SaaS, but also doing it with some controls.
I think you're a brave man to have your main ICP be procurement and CFOs, by the way. I mean,
Well,
they know how to buy, which makes it challenging for your team.
yeah, well, my background is from sales, and part of the originating idea and concept of Zylo came from the experience of selling into organizations and seeing inefficiency. But to handle it, I took some advice from probably a couple mentors of mine, but I sought out and found an amazing co-founder who is a procurement veteran for like 15 years before starting Zylo. And so we have some friendlies on our side and expertise on how to handle that buyer persona.
Yeah, just that makes sense. Like being able to use the right language and know how
Yeah,
they work has got to be
exactly.
key. So I'm going to put you on the spot for a couple of questions here, Eric. So the first is, what advice, if any, do you have for SaaS companies that want to make the cut, so to speak?
Making the cut is, I think it's important that you demonstrate clear value to the business objectives of the company, the top objectives. And I think that's where you could say on one hand, when we talked about that explosion and kind of the over adoption of technologies, it was part of that survival mode. But also because of that, I think applications were getting justified that were not necessarily part of the core strategic plan of the company. They were kind of add-ons, maybe considered nice to haves, maybe they helped a department. Those are the tools that are typically at risk now, because everything is being recentered at the exec level, and it's important that you find a way to have an executive sponsor and confirmation that the work you're doing is in line with a key objective. Like that is so important. The second thing that I think might be, if you're unable to understand that maybe clearly, which sometimes is a disadvantage if you're not like one of the maybe the most considered strategic apps, it's important to be in existing business process. So something that when an employee leaves, or like a champion or a sponsor, that when a new employee comes in, there's something to pick up. Some kind of maybe it's a workflow that you're running, maybe it's a business process. But I think the to make the cut, be in an established business process and or direct customer value, I think is really important.
Yeah, it makes good sense. I was on a podcast last week, and the host called CRM like the plumbing in your house.
Yeah,
So I think that is true, definitely of an organization of a certain size. So
yeah,
I feel good to be in that company anyway.
yeah.
So
Absolutely. It's like if you can be a system of record of something that's important enough to the company, then I think that's another element, and CRM is certainly in that category.
yeah, so if you're in SaaS, take care of your customers, right? I mean, that's make sure they're getting value and help them drive utilization with their teams, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the answers are the simplest ones. Like the right answers. I think that going back to I keep saying the basics, but it's that really is what it's about. It's tying the software and the solutions that you're providing back to these key objectives, and I think that kind of solves a lot of maybe the challenges versus worrying about you don't have a next feature or something like that. It's more about tying to the business value.
So, Eric, second question, putting you on the spot. What is the future of SaaS?
That is a great question. I think there's a lot of interesting things that are happening of like, is there a question of will a delivery model change? It does seem like we're that still the future, is a subscription model. I think there's question of maybe how pricing works and, things like that. I do think it's hard not to call out. I personally believe that the movement of AI that we're in right now is similar to when the iPhone was released, where, since the iPhone was released, the mobile market and smartphones took over the world, changed everything. And then I think that's very similar to, I'm not sure maybe to pinpoint it, but maybe when Salesforce came to market, or the SaaS, kind of that beginning of the SaaS, NetSuite, Salesforce, that whole
Cloud. Yeah.
generation. Yeah, it's like everything came forward, AWS and all of that, those shifts. And I think AI is that big. And so I think the future of SaaS is going to be where the interface will change a lot for us as users, where we may point and click a lot less and find information through chat GPT type interfaces and searching for data. And I think the efficiency of using software is only going to get better. And so I think that's kind of the next 5 to 10 years is we're going to see a major shift on how we interface with these products.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we're going to be introducing some AI into our marketing automation app this summer. Excited to talk about that.
That's awesome.
So Eric, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So great data, great insights. Looking forward to chatting again sometime.
Yeah, I would love it. So we'll continue collecting more billions of more SaaS data and ready to talk about it at any time.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this episode of Closing Time. Make sure you tick the bell, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.